Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Dominik Kamalzadeh. I'm the moderator of this encounter with Sara Fattahi, the director of Chaos, the film you're about to see afterwards. I'm happy that a few people found their way to the cinema, at least. It's a pretty tough day to talk, as we're expecting the first results of the election, of course, which brings me to the point that after our encounter at about 5:30, we're going to screen the National Broadcasting program about the results of the election. Yeah, Sarah, great to have you here. It's a bit tough to talk about your film, as I don't know how many people know your work, so we're going to talk a bit more precisely, I guess, about it in order to lay out what the points, what the crucial points of your films are. I would like to start in a way with the relationship of Chaos, which is your second feature, to your first film, Coma. There are several ties. The first one dealt with two women, I think, back in Syria, and the effects the devastating war in Syria had to their life. Both films, I would say, share a very personal, intimate approach. So maybe you can talk a bit about the connections of the two films and how your perspective shifted from Coma to Chaos.
Well, it's hard to speak about Coma now, because I always I make a film and I forget most of the images that I did before. So, but what I remember very well about the first film, that I made it while I was living still with my family, because the first film is about one family from 3 different generations, and I myself, I am one of them. But speaking about Coma, I did Chaos while I was doing Coma. I came across the first lady, the woman in Damascus, while I was doing the post-production in Beirut, and so it's somehow connected and disconnected with the first film. But I didn't know what I am going to do with the materials of the woman I shot in Damascus. Then for some reasons I couldn't come back to my country, and then I moved to Europe, and this is where I start to develop Chaos in a way. So in a way, it has so much to do with this transformative experience that I also physically experienced by moving from Syria to outside Syria. And in a way, it has so much to do with this study that I am doing, or this research about this human interior. So it's basically about 3 women, but they could be more than 3 women. Speaking about Chaos. And so this is so far what I can say about this.
Maybe to lay out briefly the structure of the film, you deal, as you said, with 3 women. One of them is yourself, of course. And there's another, 4th shadowy figure or a protagonist, which is or who is Ingeborg Bachmann. And I would like to start with that connection to Austria in a way, as you yourself remain silent during the film. And Bachmann is in a sort of echo of your experience, I would say. You're working with a interview she gave to a German broadcasting,
in
I think.
1973, yes.
73, yeah. So maybe you can talk a bit about your relation to Bachmann and why you would choose her as a reference point, as she has a very specific dialectical thinking. You're referring, for instance, to her notion of war in peacetime.
I have read Bachmann a long time ago in Arabic, and then in English, and when I moved to Austria, I had the chance to read most of the writings that not translated into Arabic in German. And I was introduced to one book that by Hans Hur, who told me about Mali Ascoro, where I moved, like it was like in 2017, and where it was like, has some letters she wrote to her doctors. And in a way, Bachmann, she was for me the connection to Vienna, or I get to know Vienna through her writings, and and in a way, it made me feel that this city, I am familiar with this city, and she can be as you said, that the echo of, especially using, having her words in the film in a way like narrates the story of those women, but at the same time she could be the doppelganger of everyone, and I, in a way, I also felt that the crimes of the past and the present are similar, so it's like it's timeless, and her her writings and her poems in a way has to do with our time. So so she made the perfect bridge between me and the story, and between me and those women, and between me and Vienna. So
and to come back to this notion of she speaks about the war in peacetime, no, and it's a sort of metaphysical war, I would say, she speaks of. So I was wondering, as this is a very pessimistic view of society, like people being incapable of breaking certain borders to come together, how would that stick to your experience?
It's not so easy to answer this, because it's I'm not sure if I can speak about feelings, or I can put that in words, but but
as the whole film is in a way about this problem, no?
Yeah, because like you have, you live in a physically at peace, but you are not really in your inner world, you are not at peace. So in a way, that was like for me the reason why I'm keep making films, because every film I have to let go on some anxieties and fears, and in a way also in her writings you feel that she was like always have this urge that she needs to let go on something, and or this is my analyze, I would say. And so you would never, I'm speaking about myself personally, maybe I would never be at peace, but even about those women who have lost, or we are all lost our loved ones in the war in Syria. Speaking about peace is always difficult, because it has to have its environment and its conditions, and this is difficult at our time.
As you said, or maybe this is a sort of way to proceed with that question of how to deal with peace, as the film, for me, is very much focused on the after effects of violence, of loss, as you said, of beloved ones, loss of security, even identity, I would say. And it doesn't really believe in a, I would say, narrative of redemption. It's more about a certain insistence of an experience which is hard to overcome or hard to cope with. I would be interested in how far did you find out about these dilemmas while doing the film, like when encountering your protagonists, or was it more like you would lay out certain patterns beforehand when you planned the film?
You speak about the process.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't believe in this this flash of inspiration. I believe more that things can grow and you have just to collect. And in the film, or those emotions, or even this loss that I experienced myself, and also those women experienced. I mean, it works a lot on a very deep. I mean, the deepest level of your really psychological, let's say, state, and in a way that I had to collect some stories and it has nothing to do with the film. But then I become very aware of the process of how the memory works, when, especially with trauma. And so it was like a very long process, and it started really, I would say, like even before the situation in Syria transformed into war. But I believe when I moved to Europe, like this, like I would say, this act of leaving my country was on me physically very difficult, because the weather different, and even emotionally was very hard. And as I was experiencing that myself, and it's manifested physically, I also came across my friend who has bipolar, and it gets very...
She's the woman in Sweden, no?
Yeah, and it gets very, very difficult during her living in Sweden, because of many effects, the weather and everything, and of course because of her loss of the brother. And so, like, it was like, for me, like, I didn't have any idea to make a film about her or to film with her, but it was like for a year I was having this contact with her, and then I developed in a very I would say, like, in a very organic way, and then I found myself making or filming with her. But it wasn't I mean, the whole process of filming with people who have been traumatized, it's not so easy, because also you need also to protect yourself, and you don't have this distance in a way, like emotionally and physically.
It's very hard to find the
it's hard, because also I know them personally.
Distance, yeah.
So I mean, it was like it took me a lot of time to also myself overcome also seeing them in this situation. But I mean, at that time when I filmed with them, they were both in a way at peace, but not at peace, not completely. Yeah.
What is striking in your film, and it really fascinated me, the way you would deal with silence. So in a way, it's a film about silence, or about the relationship of silence to knowledge, I would say, or silence to the way one would express a certain trauma, or trying to express one. When you chose your protagonist, and when you visited them, did you look for certain images? Did you look for some expression which you had in your mind? I was wondering, as you deal with a lot of, like, everyday routines, which become more than everyday routines, they become even almost symbols, I would say, like cooking or preparing certain. She's also an artist. She's dealing with collages. The other woman is more into that obsessive behavior when she's preparing the garments for her son every day. So maybe you can talk a bit about that.
I mean, in the first film, or even the first part, I mean, they are not parts, but in Damascus or even in Sweden, I mean, there were many contradictions in the environment, because in Damascus you can still hear the noise, but still the woman was completely isolated, and in a way that she was like this continuation of repeating certain actions every day was for me also fascinating, because it breaks in a way her routine, her everyday routine, even though if she seems to have this routine, but it was like, for me, has nothing to do with routine. But with the Sweden part, it was like more it was strange how she was able to live with the sound of wind blowing from the windows. And I was like telling her, have you heard this? She told me, what? And I told her, this sound that it's like coming from the window. And she told me, no, I never hear it. But I mean, that was for me like I took some time to observe their environments and to be aware of how they live complete isolation in a way that they are not anymore interested or even aware of those surroundings. And that's what I was trying to knit in one piece. But it wasn't easy, because also silence in the film was a kind of dialogue, because even the first woman was unable for a while even to express and to speak, especially after her loss. So yeah, I mean, I think I spent in the first part, which is Damascus, 1 week just observing, and it was like also the situation in Damascus at that time was very difficult, so I had to speaking about logistics, but just like she lives in a very area where it's surrounded with many checkpoints, so it was not so easy to move with equipments every day. So I had to really spend so much time taking notes. And in Sweden was easier, but it was difficult, because even filming with people who are, my friend, she's restless person, so she's moving a lot, and even in her environment for me was a torture, because she lives in a very isolated, let's say, village in northern Sweden. So it's like it was for me, those even sounds were for me like I was experiencing them, but they were where my characters were, the first woman and the second woman, they were completely unaware of that. So I had to work with those elements, because also they were unable also to talk a lot, and so I respected also the conditions of their environments and even themselves.
Maybe we have to say that that these two women are only shot in their apartments, in their like private rooms. There are no outer shots. Outside shots, at least until the end, when you travel with one protagonist into a sort of forest, which is also symbolic, because she has a certain trauma connected to that forest, which brings me in a way to the question of womanhood, in a way, since actually, this is the second part of a trilogy. You plan a third film, and all films will deal with the experience of Syrian women. So I was wondering, how would you connect this isolation to specific spaces? Like they're not able to sort of encounter an outside environment in a way. They are like isolated also in a social way, no? Is this something specific for their status in a way within society?
No, but yes and no, I think, because speaking about now, like if I want to speak about the media sidelines the women's stories, and you don't manage to see, there is no really story about women, how they live their everyday life, but more you can see women in certain stereotype images where you see them fleeing the war, or and for me that was like also kind of like as if you it was another war, another level of the war in Syria, or let's say in general. The media has contributed a lot in a very bad way to this war. But me, I found it really like this space. Even if I'm shooting in one space in every character with the first woman and the second woman, or even with my first film, which was also happening in one space. It has so much to do with the characters themselves, like their conditions. It wasn't like, let's say, my choice, but it was the choice that I had to deal with. And in a way, it was very difficult because the first, Coma was very challenging because nobody accepted the film. To fund the film, because at that time I haven't done any films before, and the people found it really like strange how we could really accept film because it doesn't please the market in a way. And the second film was also challenging because those three places were like Damascus and Sweden and Vienna, they are not connected, and those women, they haven't met. So how you can put all those pieces together? That's what makes but this war or this violent interruptions that we have in our country had so much to do with this film. So it's fragmented, but what I am trying to do is just to put together what the violence divided in my country. So it was not so easy, and I had to deal with many conditions, and I had to think of alternative solutions, but I also had to respect also this let's say, not what so-called conditions, but what the characters live through. So I had to go there, and I had to find a way how to bridge all those pieces together. And I was in a way this bridge, but in broken bridge maybe. I don't know.
Actually this is a very crucial part of the film, as it is in a way like the fragmentary style. When you deal with certain experiences, you never explain them. It's not about a sort of empiric way to present a certain, biography or something. It's more about the insistence of a certain, I would say, traumatic effect or something. Which brings me to the idea that that your film is a sort of counterposition to many documentaries nowadays dealing with Syria. Not all of them are, of course, shown in Austria, but if you go to an international festival nowadays, pretty sure you will find like one, maybe two, maybe three documentaries on Syria nowadays. And all of them, or maybe not all of them, this is too general, but many of them try to sort of construct a certain, I would say, representation of violence, or they try to encounter or they try to translate that violence, I would say, or that violent past to a sort of Western audience, no, which is problematic, I would say. So did you, when you planned the film, did you perceive it as a sort of counterposition to those films as well?
Well, I am...
Or to this tradition?
It was, in a way, it was a battle also, because those there is a wave now, and there is another wave, and they are, in a way, working not against each other, but working in a different way, and they have different means, and they have different audience, and they have even different, let's say, markets.
Agendas or markets, yeah.
And festivals in general, they want to please their audience, and but in a way, filmmakers are contributing to this, let's say, to this machine, and they feed this machine. But and I was aware that this is happening, and this is what has a larger audience and reaches many people. But I was also interested in not this faceless or nameless, let's say, process, because in a way they are. I don't find this, I would say, this line, this thin line between telling the truth and, like showing something else. And in a way, in Syria, there are thousands of truths. So every minute you have 1,000 truths, and you have 10,000 people narrate the same story. And in a way, so you have to select which narration you want to have and to to put your camera on. And in a way, I was more interested in individuals and people who have names, and give those people dignity, and showing that they have lives and they have, let's say, emotions, and they are not only numbers. Because most of the films that are unfortunately produced recently, especially about Syria by Syrian, they are unfortunately like more like has to do with documentations, but not documentaries. Because I also believe there is not one reality. You have thousands of realities, and that's why I tend now to find myself that I'm working really in parallel way, but not in reality, but more has to do with imagination. So in a way, escaping this harsh reality, and at the same time questioning this reality. So like you have this space and you have this space, but yeah, like I believe that the spectator have to also make this attempt also to see individual stories or personal stories, and also which I believe that has a greater impact on human in general, more than those images, which makes the people numb in a way. Yeah.
Maybe this is a good point to briefly tell your background, which is also interesting, as you're not, as you already said, I think you didn't went to a film school or something like that. You studied law, and then you attended a art school back in Damascus, I think. No, so maybe you can you maybe just tell us a bit about your journey to film, which is always interesting. How you would encounter certain or not encounter, but how would you address film language in the first place? Do you have an interest in documentaries at first, or is it more because the film is somehow on the borders of I would say documentary and fiction? Maybe an appropriate term would be to call it an essayistic film. It was even awarded as a fiction film in Graz at the Diagonale, which was kind of funny. So, maybe you could tell us a bit about that as well.
Going back to my first, I started from a very, very personal place to make films. I started, as I said, the first film was about my family. But before that, I graduated from this art institute in Syria while I was studying law. And after 6 years of very tough study in Syria, law is very difficult, and I was specialist in criminal law, which has so much to do with the storytelling, because you study you study every case, which is every crime, as you study film. So like you have certain images you have in your mind as a lawyer, and you have to go through them, and you have to find your way through this crime and find the gaps and fill in the gaps. And it contributed to my, let's say, visual language, but not in a very violent way, but in a very soft way. Because also I was like my relationship to image evolved over the years by working as an artistic director for more than 14 years in Syria, in several production companies and several animation companies. And this, in a way, was for me a school, because in Syria we don't have cinema school at all. So if you need to study, or if you have this, let's say, desire to study cinema, so you have to just like either self-learning, which
although there's a long tradition of Syrian cinema. So
yeah, but most of them, they studied in Russia, and it's,
good old Moscow film school, no?
Yeah, like Moscow, yes. And it's like either Moscow or Ukraine. So like, and it's really difficult to find this chance, because it was like made for specific people. So even the chances to go abroad and study in Moscow or Russia, in Russia or Ukraine, was not so easy, was not available even. And so I had to find my own ways. And in Syria we have this, let's say, censorship, in a way that also you can't access the cinema in a very easy way. Like we don't have, for some years we didn't have internet, so we don't have the access to. And many sites were blocked, and I think still blocked. So you have to find also another shops where you can find certain films. But yeah, like it was like full of impossibilities. So I mean, but I mean, so I mean, just to make this film happen was the first film was really like I have to really encountered many difficulties, many obstacles, and I had to leave my country at the end. So it's, I mean, the price of making films in Syria is not so, I would say, so easy. I mean, because for a filmmaker in the West, like to work when you are at risk is to venture, trying finding new styles. But to a filmmaker in our country, like you are venturing, not only finding new styles, but also in the meaning of death and life, and in a way that life in itself is threatened. So you have to encounter many levels of really, I mean, I would say like things that you never expect, and at the end you will end up somewhere, like either in prison or dead or outside your country.
Right. What does that mean to being a woman doing films? I mean, this must be another obstacle, you know. I mean, in even in Western countries, we're dealing with the problem that we have like too few directors in main competitions of big festivals like Venice, which was a big discussion this year. So is that something you would experience as well as an obstacle, or did you?
I mean,
did you
maybe
in my country?
Maybe in my country, but I believe that here it's more and more. I would say like women have more access to. I believe that they are not equal yet, but I mean, speaking about my country, yes, it's getting better. I mean, but still, I am from my position as an outsider. Still, I feel that there are space here, and you can breathe, and you can move, and you can work. But in my country, or even in our region, it's really difficult because they trust the men, but they don't trust women. I believe that maybe it's a norm that you know, like you can just generalize this on a larger space or places. But like, unfortunately, that's I mean, I experienced that in my first film, because nobody really would fund you with production, because they don't believe that the woman can make a film, but they would fund you with the post production, because it's easier, it's less money, and she can, you know, like she can do this. I mean, make this film with very little money. So it's not so easy. But I mean, nowadays, like I believe that there are more awareness of like giving women more, I mean, chances, are not chances, but I mean, trust them and trust their ability. But to be honest, I don't like even like to be defined by just being a woman, because also it's I mean, it's a
pigeonhole in a way.
Yes, like it's just putting somebody in a box and just say she's a female filmmaker. I mean, I don't find it really interesting. I mean, I would just like to be defined by what I do, but not what I am. I mean, in life.
You even said that in relation to being a Syrian filmmaker as well. I found that quote in an interview with you, that you don't like to be defined as a Syrian filmmaker or as a filmmaker like coming from Syria. And
I mean, it can be possible that you can say that, because I mean, I just faced that a few weeks ago, where they have written in one of the papers, and there were many filmmakers mentioned, but I was like my only name mentioned, like this Syrian refugee in Austria, and and I felt that it's like, it's even repeating this, like it's just defining this person by, or labelize this person by something, and I feel that why would I have to be labelized by that? I mean, at the end of the day, I'm trying to have a normal life like any other people. Which is really a very hard work that I have to do every day to normalize my life. But also, I mean, I don't want to be not not because it's a wish, but it's imagine if somebody would say this male film Argentinian whatever filmmaker, and then his name would come. Yeah, it's downgrade this the ability of that person, of the capacity of this person, and in a way putting him or defining him just to know how to deal with that person. So I found it a little bit cheap. So I mean, not cheap to be a Syrian filmmaker, of course not, but to define somebody by his status or yes, yeah.
What I found interesting that you mentioned that your study of law somehow has a certain relation to your films when you say you try to fill certain gaps in a way, but on the other side your films are much about gaps in a way, which I found very stimulating and interesting, even if you address the concept of memory, and there are like very like intense scenes in the film when for instance the older woman Syria talks about the murderer of her son, and you never try to explain the whole story, but you focus on a certain, I would say, image or maybe expression. Maybe can you try to elaborate a bit about this idea of focusing on certain expressions? Is this something you would look for in the first place, more than about, like dealing with the whole totality of a certain episode of life or something?
In Chaos, I mean, I start working on this film from a painting of Caravaggio's painting, which I found through my research, because I was like researching in how you can see violence without really showing violence, and or how you can feel it without seeing it. But so, I mean, I try to, in a way, to use this visual language and to really, like in Chaos, because I mean it was more about this I don't know the English word of it, like detecting, like a kind of how this happened, this crime took place, because that was my, let's say, my process of finding out how can I tell also visually this story. But it was more as we do, or as I studied from my background as a lawyer, that you really have to deal with details. Like you have to really write all those details and to keep them. Those are your evidence. So in a way that was like moving, because I mean, even when I met the woman in Damascus, she was unable as I said, for a while to speak. And then I saw her speaking using her hands a lot, and using her face a lot, and using her eyes a lot. But at the same time, I didn't want to put her like so like directly in the film, because also it has to do with this direct speech of violence. But
it's a very like dark scene and sort of obscure, yeah.
And so I kept her in a way in the dark, because also I wanted to respect her sadness, and I was also trying with her to find out the truth while she was speaking, and in a way I was. Which is something I studied, that you have to study the psychological, really, let's say, analyze of the character before going into the truth, like before moving to the next step, and or finding out the evidence of this. So it was like for me this process that I wrote down all her expressions, how when she speaks, what she does with her hands, and then I start to visually like structure my images with her. And this also goes with the second character, which is like in Sweden, but it was like entirely different environment, because everything was clear, but she was the only person who was centered in the middle of the frame, and she was like in a way really detached from this environment, which is like very clear environment, but she is the only one who was like really have this detachment. So I mean, working with details also has to do with her craft, because she is a painter, but she's also using a lot their hands, and so this is also has to do with this fingerprints, with this, you know, when you find out crime, and so it was like for me also in a way, how can I film feelings? And the only way, or I was not really
sure. It's
like
a scene of crime in a way.
Yeah, yeah. And I was not sure what I'm doing. I mean, it was like I was in control, but of losing control. So when I left back to Vienna, and I was seeing the materials again, I was surprised. And when I saw the film the first time, after finishing the draft on a big screen, I was scared, because I saw all my film in extreme close-ups. And I believe that I said once to my producer that I made a disaster. It's not a film. And then they said, no, it's okay, it's okay. And like it was like, for me, I didn't know exactly that I will end up having a film of extreme close-ups. But yeah.
That's interesting, yeah. Are there already questions, as we have like maybe more like 15 minutes to go? So I was wondering if somebody... Yeah, it's hard to... I don't see a hand so far. Yeah, one question I wanted to ask before, actually, we came back to the film, was your sort of cinephile, your cinephile you, as I was thinking of Chantal Akerman from time to time when I saw the film the first time, in the way you would, as already said, go back to a very intimate setting, concentrate on women, concentrate on daily routines. So I was wondering if she's a reference for your filmmaking, or do you have other ones?
Actually, no.
No, okay.
No. But I mean, I was like, I think I was told many times that like there are similarities. But I mean, you know, like the memory works in a very strange way. But because I mean, when you see something, you say, "Oh, I have seen this somewhere." I mean, it's like I think all the filmmakers, all the films I have seen, even in my life, that reminds me of something else. And I think it's a collective way of working on memories. And but no, I haven't seen her films really. But I mean, I remember that one day I was in Montreal and I saw her film, No Home Movies, which they said that it was like similar to my first film, and they even thought that I made the first film when she made that film, but it was like my film was finished before her film, and then she died, and it was like very complex way, but to find out her film or how to discover Chantal. But unfortunately, I haven't seen any of her films while I was in Syria, or even when I worked on my first or second. And I even tend to say that I am always on a visual diet, so I don't see a lot of films, and especially when I'm working on something. But no, I mean, I like her way of working. But I mean, speaking about coma or chaos, people think that I am just like working with women. But I mean, no, it happened that I am by chance surrounded by women more than by men. But I mean, I would say, like, if I have the opposite, I would do this also. I mean, I would discover this word again, but from a different perspective. Yeah.
But you plan to come back to another story of a woman for your third film of the trilogy, no?
Yes, I mean, it's calm now. It's called Calm, finally. But it's also like 50% happening in Vienna, 50% happening in Beirut, and it's also, in a way, I mean, by chance, it's about women.
And it will be a fiction film finally, or I heard that or read that. So
fiction partly, documentary partly. I mean, fiction in the storytelling, because I mean, I will work with the Austrians. They will be I mean, this is the fiction part, but the people who are, I mean, I found myself now asking many people who are I know in my life personally to be part of the film. Do you like to play this role? Yes, let's do it. And so, like, in a way, like, it has so much, like, I keep those people with their names, with what they are doing in life, but I mean, I invite them to be in a different, let's say, setting. So it's like just to play, not a game, but just to see, to experiment a little bit between having this reality and also having this space of imagination.
And Beirut will be a sort of stand-in for Syria then, or will it be about Beirut as well, or because I heard that it's a story about a woman trying to get back to her country. Or, so I was just wondering about that.
Actually, yes. I mean, the first film was about happening in Damascus. The second film, which is Chaos, happening in and out Damascus. And now it's like about the possibility to return back to Damascus. But the film starts, I mean, it's happening in the future, so it's like not really now or in the past, but it's also in a way happening in the past. So I mean, it's happening in the 70s. So also in a way connected to the civil war in Lebanon.
Any questions here? Yeah, there's one. Please.
Yeah, it's on. So I was wondering, you are filming two different women and also yourself. What was like the difficulties to film yourself, or was it more maybe easier?
No, it's not. It's not so easy to film yourself, of course, because also it's not an option to put a camera and to talk to myself. But it was like until I made Chaos, I felt that I need to see this whole self, as I said that before. That the war was like for me this violent really interruption, so I couldn't really make the film like in my first film. You see glimpse of me, like my eye, or very close-ups, very shots, like where you don't manage to see my whole self. But in Chaos, I made this shot where I was like in the MRI, where I really felt that I need to see myself in a whole picture, just to scan myself again. And so like it was like more let's say trying to discover what happened with that person that I used to be. So I'm still the same, just like visually trying to also experiment with the images and how you can collect, as I said, that to put together what the violence divided in Syria. So that was the way how I worked with myself. But it was like, in a way, I needed this space, which is a state of mind where I created in the film with the Bachmann, or the doppelganger of Bachmann. And that was like for me my space as well, where I felt that this also gave me that breathe, like, and also the way to escape, also seeing myself again in the film.
I remember one scene which is very specific in a way, you being in a sort of computer tomography. I don't know if that's the right English word for it, but it's like
Chaos.
Yeah.
It was MRI.
Yeah. And in a way, I remember that it is a very specific montage sequence, because I think the next shot from out of the computer tomography is a sort of train tunnel shot in the dark. So, which is one of the I would say powerful qualities of your film, that you always have this sort of erratic, associative montage telling. So I was wondering, as you said, you had a lot of close-up shots of your protagonists when you came back from the shooting. How would you elaborate, or how would you actually construct the storytelling, the montage of the film in the end? Did you have a certain storyboard in mind while you were shooting already, or was it like you would actually construct the film in the end at the montage table?
No, no. Again, but I mean, I scripted the film, and I mean, in general, I write a lot and I film less, and it's a way like it helps me to also have a structure and have a plan, because I don't work with a big crew. I work with myself, so I mean, I have to also direct myself in a way. But I mean, not so much, like not too strict, just like to also have a certain like freedom when I'm working. But I mean, I scripted the film in a way that I need to have those shots done in this this setting, in this like how I visualize the film. And of course, I work with a very, very good, I mean, she's a wonderful really editor, and she's really a very talented and gifted person, and she's my best friend at the same time, so we have this chemistry. And it was not so easy to work with her, because also she's based in Beirut, I am here. It's hard for her to come here. She's Syrian, half Russian, so no visa, and for me going there, it's not an option, because also no visa. So like we had to find a way to also construct this film and to edit this film, but without meeting. And yes, like it was like we don't have other options. I mean, I'm not working with a very nice condition, luxurious conditions where I am like free to move and free to do everything. So I had to also deal with this. Like it was like another level of challenging, because I need to keep this person to work with me, and because I mean she can really be my hand and my eyes, and in a way she helps me a lot to distance also myself emotionally from every film, because she made the first film with me as well. And at the very end, like I was talking to her every time I shot films, and she was writing down what I have done, and I was like trying to send her every time a backup of the images. At the very end, we succeeded to bring her to Austria for a couple of weeks, and then we finished the whole editing in 10 days. So like we had the film, just like the first draft took us 5 days to finish, and then the final cut was like done in 7 days. And we didn't have enough time to, and so it was like this way, because she also was really very structured, and I mean, we were like, even though we live in very, I mean, everyone in a different continent, but it was like as if we live in one space. And yeah, like she told me that while she was working, it was easy for her to structure the film, because I mean, it was like as if she has written written in the papers, but at the same time she had to change a lot of the structure, because this was the scene where I wanted to start the film with. This was like the beginning.
Really?
Yes, it was like the first sequence.
And this decision came at the very end, that the whole structure was sort of turned around again, or
she suggested that let's put this really dark hole in the middle of the film. And in a way, just like to swallow up this space, in a way, like those spaces, not to open the spaces, but rather to close this space. And I kind of, at the first I was hesitant to accept this, but then she disappeared for several hours, and then she came back and she told me, I have a gift for you. And then she put the film this way, and I said, okay, I accept it, and that's it. It was like her present in a way. And yeah, like it made sense also, like to see the film and having this hole in the middle, which is also in a way telling this story from this arc of movement from Damascus to Europe, which is also in a way for me, I find this underground life very violent, because I mean we never had it in Syria, and we don't have those really loud, really noisy really sounds, where it's like very, very, for me it was like always like scary, like sounds. So I also, in a way, it has to do with this metaphor of the war, in a way that you live in here, but I mean you have those really loud sounds where it reminds you of this violence in a way. So it was like very, I would say, a very good way to break the film in the middle with this whole.
as we have to come to an end, maybe as a last question, which is more anecdotal in a way. I heard that you actually, or not heard, but read, I think Lily wrote it when she met you, that you decided to come to Vienna at a very late moment when you actually already were at the airport, and you actually wanted to go to Berlin, and then you decided to come to Vienna. So is that true? And did you ever regret it?
Yes. Yes, no. This is yes and no. It's yes, it happened. Like I was living in Beirut at that time, and I remember that the ticket I bought, it was to Berlin, and I was doing the check-in in the airport, and even my family, they said goodbye, like this is the last time, and they all know that I'm going to Germany, and even my people or my friends in Berlin, they are informed that I am coming. But I found myself asking the lady, poor lady, she was like doing the check-in, and I asked her to where I'm going. She said to Berlin, and I told her, am I going to Berlin? She told me, yes, your ticket to Berlin. I told her, no, I'm not going to Berlin, I'm going to Vienna. And she told me, but your ticket is going to Berlin. I told her, no, I will buy another one. And that was like immediate decision, but I didn't know why I did this. But it's somehow in the film like this doppelganger, that you feel that you lived another life somewhere. And when I came to Vienna, I came in 2015. Before I moved to Vienna, I was living in Beirut. And I remember that a driver was like driving me in the car in the city, and he told me, how far you like Vienna? I said, it reminds me of Damascus. Yeah. And I think this is the moment where I felt that if I want to choose to live in a city, like maybe it's visually different from Damascus, but this sense of the history, this sense of the past, that you live every day with the past, but I mean you are in a different time, it somehow has to do with my memory of my city. I mean, now I forget my city totally, like I can't even remember. But the first year was very traumatic in Vienna, and I even felt somehow regretted this decision. But then second year it became easier, and then it's now like I would say, like I leave and I always thank God I am home. So it's like it's really like I feel home now. But I mean, strange how I feel home. I feel home because I am close to my things, but I also like feel that this city in a way wasn't so easy in the beginning, and there was like a very hard relationship, but now it's like more I would feel that if she's a woman, she's very generous with me.
She's definitely a woman.
Yes.
Let's see where this woman will lead us, political-wise. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for listening, and have a nice evening.